Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome, everybody. And it's lovely, really nice to be here with you all. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce to all of you my friend and colleague, Françoise Davoine. Françoise, as most of you probably know, is a psychoanalyst. And you might not know this, but she's author. Can everyone see this book that I'm holding up?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. Okay, good. She's author of Wittgenstein's Folly, and with her beloved late husband, Jean-Max Gaudrier, History Beyond Trauma, which both books I highly recommend. Françoise and Jean-Max run a seminar, Madness and the Social Link, at EHESS, which I and Julie had the pleasure of attending. It's in Paris, and I think, Françoise, you did it for like 40 years?
Yes.
Yeah, 40 years. Françoise started her life in utero in a Nazi Gestapo jail cell as her mother was part of the French resistance. And she spent a good part of her life as a co-researcher with her therapy partners to help free people from a cell of distressing madness, integrating cut-out pieces of the social unconscious and laying to rest ghosts of past traumas, betrayals, and social catastrophes. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Françoise Davoine. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Brian.
Oh,
Your
welcome.
introduction was perfect. Thank you. So, how to open an unprecedented dialogue with unreachable parts of patients who have been traumatized or present psychotic episodes. Those parts remain out of speech and of time. They recur always in the present time. And there is no use to say, oh, this was caused by the past event. They say, I know. And how do we change? So I will contend that this opening of dialogue happens through a resonance between the analyst's and the patient's lived experience that we are not aware always. And I will quote Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, under the control, of course, of Brian, who is much more knowledgeable than me on scientific literature on neuroscience. So this book says that in circumstances of life threats, psychological or physical, our animal brain takes over. And the neurological pathways leading to the prefrontal sites of speech, language, and time are disconnected, blank. For van der Kolk, dissociation is not a pathology, but a tool of survival. I will present through clinical case how this tool is at work in the transference with trauma or psychosis. And I give you two examples. The first one is about myself. And the second, how I used it in the transference with a patient diagnosed bipolar. Eventually, as Brian said, this unprecedented dialogue opened an access to discarded or cut out parts of history. We always, Jean-Max and I always insisted on the importance of historical catastrophes. So I start with my story. It's not often I do that. In February 2019, I had a pacemaker operation in emergency as my heart was slowing down. The next day, the surgeon told me that I should stay during a week in the hospital because there was some problem, but he was not talkative. I did not like him very much. So, but as usual, that's my usual way, I did not panic. And I say, oh, I'm going to read Van der Kolk book. Why? Because it was in the mailbox when I left my home to go to the hospital. And it had been sent by a Belgium psychoanalyst from Belgium who works with extreme states, Maria Gortz. So I took the book automatically. So when I read it, while I was in my hospital room, it was for me a breakthrough. I discovered something which I want to share with you. And I even identified with the author. Van der Kolk was born in 1944, during the war, like me, a year after, and during a very terrible time of famine, you see, in Holland. No wonder he was attracted, like I was, to trauma, to healing trauma. But not like me, he became a psychiatrist and he worked in Boston Vet Hospital. And as he failed completely to help or to treat the Vietnam veterans, he decided in the 80s to train in neurology. And that was the beginning of what you called brain imaging. Mm-hmm. So he, after what I'm going to tell you, he went back to be a psychotherapist, which is explained in the last part of the book. The main clue which interested me was, as I said, the part played by our animal brain. So don't ask me all the terms in neurology that I don't master, of course, like amygdala, parasympathetic system, and also the limbic system are at work. On an image, which is in the book, he shows the whitening out of this region of neural pathways. There are two, the prefrontal brain, they are white. And he took that picture from a scanner with two people, or two scanners of two people who had come to the hospital completely traumatized after a huge, massive car accident on the highway. Many people died. They were not hurt physically, but very traumatized. And this image shows the white part in the brain, like if it was disconnected. But for Van der Kolk, it's not a lesion, since it can be reactivated, or you could say reanimated, with psychotherapy. So, as I was very happy to learn about that, I applied it to, I had questions to my own case. So, some months later, I was heading to the first control appointment with a doctor, they call them rhythmologue. I don't know here, rhythmologue. And I decided, although he was not very sympathetic, to thank him. After all, I was alive, so I said, thank you, you saved my life. Unexpectedly, this very stern man, young man, but stern, exploded. Oh, your surgery, what a mess. Your heart stopped to beat on the operating table. I did not know, of course. And then, as he was so sincere, I dared to ask timidly my question from my reading. Can it be that the parasympathetic system slows down the heart to that extent? It was a naive question. He answered, were there things happening to you when you were a baby? I was stunned because, you know, this man was miles away from psychoanalysis, and my Lacanian analyst had never been interested by those matters. He was, of course, I liked him, of course, transference, but he was completely, how could I say, in a foreclosure of history. So I told him about what Brian told you, the pregnancy of my mother and my 2 first years in a war zone in the Alps. And he became very talkative. He said, you know, I observed that when people had life threats or, you know, something very, very important when they were very young, this comes back at an old age, like you, triggered by some event. They fall dead. And as a cardiologist, he had many cases like that. Well, not so many, I don't know. So I was very surprised by his understanding that he shared with me. I don't know if that is reference in scientific articles. I don't know what is the value, but for me, it had a great value because I realized that my heart had been slowing down little by little after Jean-Marc's death, which occurred 4 years before. So now, this doctor said to me, he was talkative, as I say, you probably trained yourself to slow down your heart. So who is you? Who is the subject of that? Who trains oneself to react physically to face dangers? I just realized something for me, which is normal. When there is chaos around me, I stay calm. I regret, I don't weep, I don't scream, I don't agitate, I don't sleep, but I stay calm. So I began to be interested by that. And of course, now, although that testimony of the doctor, I have not read articles on cardiologists, I don't know, I did not do that. But this testimony validated for me the kind of unconscious that Jean-Marc and I always distinguished from the repressed unconscious, which we called the cutout unconscious. which is not made with metaphors, which is not made with metonymies, which is not made, like I would say, with signifiers. It is made with bodily, sensuous images. Perhaps we could say that in Freud, project for scientific psychology, it could, which was on neurology, before Freud's renouncement to this kind of clinical practice with trauma, psychosis, he abandoned his neurotica in September 1897, so 2 years after. But at that time, when he was in touch with a very traumatized patient, he promoted, or the primary, primary, secondary process made of images of words, images of things, images of sensations, not related to speech. And as they are not related to speech, which Lacan would call the symbolic order, but never mind, that means they are not related with symbols. And symbols are the matter of the counting of time. You know, now there are some difficulties to adjust. We changed our clock, you didn't. And it's a whole thinking about those symbolic process. Is it before, is it after? So when there is no more symbols, time stops. We cannot count the time. There is no chronology. So all this unconscious, of course, unconscious does not know time, but the symptoms which recur are in the present time. There is no past and future. I will give you now an example of how I used my dissociated parts with a patient who was diagnosed bipolar. Of course, that happens before I read Van der Kolk, but this reading gives some clue about what happened in between us. We were in January 2015, and a visual artist who was just discharged from hospitalization for bipolar psychosis and who was no more able to create since a long time, came to consult Jean-Max. But Jean-Max made clear that due to his condition, he had cancer, and he still worked with people he knew, but he did not want to take new people. He gave him an address. 3 months after, in April, Jean-Max died. And this man called me. Why? Because 3 months, January, February, March, was the lapse of time before his father's death when he was born. So his father died when he was 3 months old. And it was such a coincidence that he had seen Jean-Max 3 months before his death. So we decided he wanted to work with me, and we started. His father, the story was, his father was a military officer, yes, during the Algerian War, and his office had been blasted by an attack which killed him and colleagues, while his wife and the baby son were on the first floor, upstairs, and were unharmed. Very soon after, the family, the mother and widow, went back to France to their native village. And he never came back to Algeria. During our work, of course, there were trust and so on. So he retrieved little by little his creative powers, you could say. But one of the first was very, very uncanny. Not uncanny, was very surprising. He brought me a book he had written, but it was a book with poetic writings on the right and etchings. You say etchings? Yeah. Etchings on the left side, on each page. The title was Little P. Little P. P is the first letter of a name. This little P was a Jewish child whose photo he had seen smiling just before deportation. His family was not Jewish. Why this little boy was the center of his creation when he recovered the possibility to create? I did not know, but what was uncanny was in the middle of the book, completely different from other etchings, was a drawing of him as a boy, lying naked with a man sitting near. I thought at first, is it his father? You know, I asked him, who is he? Oh, he's a German man who was my lover when I was 14. He was wonderful, very nice, very generous, and he opened for me culture and art. Remember, he lived in a small village and in poor conditions. It was so, it was very uncanny to have this paint, this drawing in the middle of the story of the Jewish child. But, so I tried to question this relationship. No, that was completely normal. And I felt reactionary. You know, not in the model of nowadays ideals, but I was reactionary in a way that I was inquiring on the past, and the past had not passed. So there was no need to inquire on the past. We had to stay in the present tense. Although, but little by little came fragments of history. He had not said that like that. He, bit by bit, I learned one day in the middle of something else that his father, already a military, had been a POW in Germany during Second World War. Then, perhaps 3 months later, I learned a little fragment that his father had been transferred in 1942 in the camp of retaliation camp, it's called in English, because he was a rebel, probably, of Rawaruszka in Poland, which was a deadly camp for prisoners, not a deportation. But in that, so I looked on Wikipedia. It's useful for me. And I looked at in Rawaruszka, thousands of Jews had fled and were deported to Belzec. So probably, I thought, the little Jewish child had been seen by his father as a last, smiling at the last, for the last time, like he had seen his son for the last time, probably smiling 3 months before his death. That was my construction. So I changed my mind Instead of speaking of the past and saying you that would have been with no effect, I spoke about the present tense. My baby in me, I don't know if it's mine, but the baby in me talked, who knew how to dissociate, talked to the baby he had been. And I let them dialogue, unprecedented dialogue. And this baby said to the other, you have many memory of the sensations, perceptions of your father living body, still now. It's afterwards, the title of Van der Kolk, the body keeps the score. That was what I was saying. The baby was saying, your body keeps the score of perceptions of your father. And that struck him, because until now, he was immersed in this father death in a very, very contradictory manner. For the people in the village, the father was a hero, very famous, and they always say, oh, you look like your father, you are the little, calling him the name of the father, you are the little so-and-so. And for others, he was not famous, this military man, but infamous in the post-colonization war, where French army was condemned by the opinion. Well, not a lot of, a big part of them. So he was between famous, infamous, and stuck to that dead father. Suddenly, when speaking, the baby reactivated the sensations, living sensations. He started to weep in front of me. He could not stop weeping. And another image came to his eyes, a photo of his father holding him in his arms. This came alive again. This experience, lived experience, became alive again. So the next summer, he decided to go back to Algeria. He went to Algeria he had from France some Algerian friends who could help him find his way. He went to the place of his home in his native town. He could see the blue sky over his 3-month-old age. He could smell odors which had disappeared and they were very familiar. He could touch. He could hear the voices, the language, Arabic language, which he had heard. He could touch. That is what he described to me. He could touch the carpets, the clay, the ceramics, all these, what his body had recorded became real, alive. And then he did not need to deny his experience with the man again. Yes, or still. He told me out of the blue, you know, when I was 14, I knew very well that this German man had exiled into France, fleeing Germany, where he was prosecuted for pedophilia. He knew it. But what was he doing? I asked, but then how did, this was very, very pleasant with him. I submitted to, you submit to the aggressor when there is no other issue. But the submission he was talking about dated, was a present danger, was a war that took place ages ago and which was present for the little boy that he enacted. Okay, I don't know if you understand what I mean, but we will discuss. So now, I want to finish now about, you know, the expression animal brain. Well, animal is a word which is despising. You behave like an animal. That means brutal. That means without thinking, without pure reactions, instincts, and so on. And I reflected about that. You know, we together, through my own experience, lived experience, and his, I could say it like that. We were on the tracks, following the tracks of ancient crimes perpetrated in the present tense. We were like dogs, smelling the tracks. And I'm going to shock you. But it's not me who speaks like that only. It's Eschil, how you pronounce Aeschylus? Aeschylus? The Greek tragic.
Oh, yeah.
Eschil?
Aeschylus, yeah.
Aeschylus. In Agamemnon. I always remember that quote. Remember, I did classic literature. That quote is verse 1043, 1044 in Agamemnon. And it's the choir. You know, in the choir, there is a chief, a leader of the choir called the Coryphaeus. So this speaks of Cassandra. You know, Cassandra who travels across time, she sees the future and nobody trusts her. And he says of Cassandra, let me find well, she's the foreigner. Of course, she comes from Troy, defeated Troy. She's a slave in the court of Agamemnon, and who is just, who will be just, slaughtered by his wife Clytemnestra. She sees that ahead. And the Coryphaeus says, you, the foreigners, I think, you have the nose of a bitch. She smells the track and finds the blood. That is not very, it's very rough as a verse. But I think, you know, today, like for the ancient Greek, there is a special kind of dogs that are called blood dogs. And they are trained to find wounded animals and not let them suffer. And they are very, very, what is the word? Very tenacious. They have a lot of tenacity. They have a lot of, they are prey. Huh? Tenacious, thank you. They are very tenacious. We are like Cassandra. With our patient, we travel through times in the present tense. And we, sometimes, not always, but with lived experience, we are like blood dogs who track ancient and actual crimes, abuses, slaughters of the soul, enslavements, denied by what Arendt used to call the banalization of evil. Okay, now I will end with a teaching that Jean-Max and I received from Sioux medicine men about the animals. We used to go to Ostenbrück Center every summer during a long time. And there came one day Jerry Mohat, a friend of the therapist there, who was on the Rosebud Reservation, a psychologist, and he had also a ranch, cows and the horses. And he invited us because he was working with Sioux medicine men, and he had helped them to create a college, to Sintegleshka College, to teach their traditions, language, and medicine. So we participated in ceremonies and giveaways and so on. And we had a lot of conversations. Like, it was not anthropology at all, because we didn't know at all the anthropology of the Sioux Indians, but we considered them like colleagues. And we discussed our cases with them like we would do at Ostenbrück. Repeatedly, they used to say, you, Western people, you always put man on the top of the pyramid. We consider the opposite, that the man is at the bottom of the scale of living beings, for a simple reason. We need them. We need the animals to live. The animals need the plants and the rocks. So the top of the pyramid is the rock which have such a long memory. And I agree completely with, when we speak always about with those patients, well, they are not animals, they are humans, but they dealt with such humans, that very often dogs or cats or whatever, horses, are there a much more reliable other than humans. And I think this dependency is interesting in our time of climate change. I finish on that.
I want to thank you, Françoise, for inviting us into the complexities of engaging with people in real kinds of ways. It's very heartening. I think to those of us who try to do this work also, it's a good reminder to people who sit on the other side of that table of what is possible to be engaged with respectfully. So just thank you.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments or questions for Françoise? Well, people could think about it, but Françoise, a couple things I was thinking about. Thank you also for such a rich and personal narrative. And I had, when you were talking about the bloodhounds or the blood dogs that basically had a saving function to find wounded animals and to help them not to suffer. I thought of something that happened in your own life, and maybe incorrect here, but I have this memory of you once talking about your mom hiking, I think, and a dog saved her from falling off a cliff or something. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah.
A dog had saved your mom, and that was before you were born, right?
You want me to tell about that?
I thought it was very important.
Okay. That was also in relationship with a very, very extreme experience of a patient. I just tell you the story. I received a phone call from somebody who said, I'm a psychiatrist. You make a seminar on Don Quixote. I have Don Quixote in my office. Can I send him to you? And I say, okay, send him. I thought it was a joke. And 1 week after, a young man arrived. He had just received a lot of electroshocks, ECT. He considered himself as a rapist. Oh. And he had consulted that second psychiatrist to escape ECT, and who had called me. And the first, he did not know what was psychoanalysis and so on. He was wondering what he was doing in my office. And I say, what happened? And as if it was in the present, he told me that he was coming from a faraway country by plane, all alone at 60 years old. And there was a parent, some relative whom he did not know, who should greet him as his parents would come back to France a month after. And in that plane, his dog, his beloved dog, was dead, completely choked in the place where you put luggage. And he saw his tortured dog even today. And I saw that ancient child still muffled because he could not learn very well at school. He had always been marginal, and his delusion happened when he was in the 20s. And he was from hospital to hospital. And instead of exploring, I don't know what, I surprised myself. Again, the dissociation. I raised from my chair, went to my books shelf, took the picture of a dog that I had gathered some time ago, not long ago, when they were throwing things in my family. That dog. And I showed him, it was the head of a Saint Bernard dog, not beautiful at all. And I say, you see that your dog died, but you can live. I owe my life to this dog. And I was thinking, why do I say that to a young man I don't know? He seemed relieved. Again, the connection, I think, probably mirror neurons, Brian. I am reading your paper you sent me. Something, connected.
Yes,
Brian?
yes, yeah.
So I told him the story. This is a she dog, Saint Bernard dog. My father had retrieved her as they wanted to euthanasia.
Nice.
Euthanized, yeah. Because she was a military dog during the war for the Alpine troops, and she carried the munitions and the packs and the weapons. And there was a grenade which had exploded in her face. That's why she was not beautiful. And they wanted to, and my father had saved her, taken her, and she was always with him in the mountains. Okay. And that day they were hiking, well, that was for their job too. And my mother went with a friend quicker than the man. And the man saw the dog going to and fro, panting, running up, down, up, down. And finally they looked and the women were going on a cliff, but the vegetation which grows in the mountains horizontally because of the wind prevented them to see where they were going. So they shouted, and the dog arrived and died of heart attack, probably. So they buried her and put her name on the rock. So I tried. I spoke about that story, and this young man was very interested. And that was the beginning of, he wanted to stay, and that was the beginning of, so the animals.
And Françoise, it also fits with something that stayed with me when you first mentioned it a while ago. People want, our therapy partners want to know, who are you?
Yeah, that was Dory Loeb. You
Yeah,
know, Dory, that was Dory. That question was always asked. Dory Loeb, you know, the founder of the 80s, I think, the video testimonies of the Holocaust. He says that when you speak with people who have lived experience extreme, they always want to know to whom they are speaking. That's normal. Veterans, they together, you know, you don't speak to anybody because you don't want to meet voyeurs, people who are very enlightened by your misery. They love that. You don't want pity. You don't want any or indifference, just objective recording. So they ask you, who are you? That was the repeated sentence. And that's true. And you show, of course, usually they don't say that so clearly, but you show by some hints, details, that connection. Who you are, that means you are not the super psycho something. You are not the neutral observer or the neutral echo to their words, but you are somebody who can fail, who can be completely make mistakes, and then you create otherness, because in those circumstances the other has been destroyed. In those dear circumstances there is no other, and you have to create it from scratch and repeatedly, because you are another, you are blown out, you are another, you are blown out, and little by little this otherness is created, which is not it's not a beloved relationship. It can be, but the main issue is trust. And you trust somebody who can fail. You don't trust somebody who is always right, who gives interpretations like a machine gun. Or who is so neutral you cannot grasp. And even Winnicott said that the catastrophe in the fear of breakdown at the last article, he writes that the catastrophe can happen in the session as present again, which is not the unconscious repressed. It is the cutout experience of the catastrophe in reaction to the mistakes and failures of the analyst. So this is the other, we say in French, I like the pun in French, faillible, failing, and fiable. And fiable is trustworthy. Fiable and failing. Thank you, Brian, for your question.
Yeah, but
Yes?
Other people want to make a comment or question? The quote, someone's asking, what is the quote from Winnicott? It's from Fear of Breakdown. And he goes on to talk about how we succeed by failing, but like Françoise was saying, but failing the patient's way, our therapy partner's way.
Blunders, when we make blunders, when we make dreams, which surprise us about that session, when we made praxis, when we have the wrong appointment, wrong hour, some things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there, yeah,
mm-hmm.
Go on.
But Françoise, can everyone see, you had mentioned Gerald Mohat.
Oh,
and,
yeah. The price of a gift.
Yes, can everyone see it? Is it visual?
So it's Joey Galalk, the medicine man.
Yes.
And Jerry, who wrote together that book. But what is interesting in that book is that at the end, there is a testimony of their coming to France. There was a Sioux Indian who had, that was the first time we met them, they had some French names coming from French, comment, coureurs des bois, how do you say, French trappers. And they were called Tours, Orléans, Beauvais, Roubidou. And they asked us, where are our ancestors? And after a while, we went several summers. They say, okay, you come to fetch among us what you have at home, but you completely denied it. And we would like to go to Paris. So Jean-Max, it was in 85, he found the money in our school to bring them to France. They were George, Stanley Redbird, and also, well, Peter Catches from the neighbor reservation of, I don't remember the name. And we brought them to our social science institute, École des hautes études en sciences sociales, where was Lévi-Strauss, Barthes, Derrida, and very, very great historians. And they made a talk. They gave a talk. So the field for the anthropologist was coming in the place and spoke their own way. And then we took them, it was very, very, a last story I can say?
We have time.
We have time, okay. And then we were invited in communal houses of culture in Reims, where we continued to do what we used to do with them, talk with them as colleagues. And in the afternoon, the population of the town of Champagne, came to talk with them. Okay, but the most interesting was, you know, we were in the Lacanian school and stayed a long while and until its dissolution, but I had some reserves toward Lacan's theory toward psychosis, because he never addressed the topic of transference. He spoke theoretically, but no clue on transference. And he was quite a psychiatrist. When I assisted his case presentation, it was also to say, always to say, oh, you see, there is the foreclosure of the name of the father. And that was it. So that's why we went to Riggs, to see people who really worked with transference in psychosis. But there was somebody I liked very much in the École Freudienne, who was Françoise Dolto, the child analyst. Although I was not a child analyst, so she was not my supervisor. And one day, when the medicine men were there, I was scratching my head. What psychoanalyst could I invite? And I thought, Françoise Dolto. Although I did not know her personally, she came. She was very excited, this old lady. The medicine man started to, and she acted exactly like I wished, like we did. Not observing, not interpreting, but contributing. The medicine man started to tell the story of a young Indian boy who was hospitalized. I don't know, in Colorado, I don't know where, or in South Dakota, I don't remember. And the doctors, the white doctors, could not do anything with him. And he was dying. Well, it was not a disease. He was letting himself die. So they asked the medicine man to come. And the medicine man came with his Stanley Redbird, his helper, and probably the mother and people, and they did a ceremony. The healing is always through a ceremony, where the ritual formula is all my relatives, meaning not my relatives, my parents, but the trees, the animals, the rocks I am connected to, the landscapes. And said Joy, suddenly he saw the body of the child up in the ceiling with lightnings and of light and dark, lighten and dark, lighten and dark. And at the end of the ceremony, he gave some water or something to drink to the boy. The boy got better. I tell it's, I don't know if it's in the book, but I shortened the story. And we were all waiting what Françoise Dolto would say to that therapy. And she said, for me, it's exactly the same. When I have a baby who is in such a marasm, you have that word in English, marasmus?
Yeah, yes.
Marasmus, when there is no more limits, when no other, when the baby slips to a death. I feel at his place the opposition of life and dark, of soft and hard, of in and out, and so on and so on. And I tell him. And that's I have in supervision some analysts, one or two, who trained with the Dolto and who work with abandoned children, you know, because she organized that, abandoned children from immigrants who have no bearings whatsoever. And it's amazing how those women are bringing them back to life. Exactly with this interference, with those resonances. That's my story.
Thank you so much, Françoise. I'm afraid we have to stop here. we're out of time, but you offered a Babette's feast for us as usual. Thank you. And
Thank
thank
you,
you,
Brian.
everybody in
About what?
Trom. Gabor Mate, if you are familiar with his
No,
work.
I know. I receive a lot of. I know. I was invited to participate, and after a while, I stopped.
Hmm.
That's
So the answer is yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your participation. All right. We'll stop here. Take care.
Take care, Brian. I'm going to read your paper.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.